As an alcoholic, people think that there's certain things I can't do anymore. When I work my program and I am spiritually, mentally, and emotionally fit, which is what I'm taught through that process, there's nothing I can't do, and it's all about my motive. It's about changing my perspective on my day. Nothing that happens in the day controls me unless I allow it to. It was like I took all of my power and freedom back in that. And through that, staying spiritually, mentally, and emotionally healthy is knowing that wherever I am spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, it's okay. Thoughts and feelings come, and I have to differentiate between the truth and the false, and then I control my behavior. And my behavior reinforces thoughts and feelings. Whereas like one little thing could happen and I would just think my whole life sucked. And it's not that way anymore. It's about breaking it down into the small stuff and not giving away my power so easily.
Ready? Ready to rock and roll? Is that action? All right. Okay.
That's right.
All right.
Absolutely. Go. Go.
Hello, everybody. It's Jason Will with
Go.
This is a real estate podcast, but we talk about leadership, personal growth, and becoming the best version of yourself. Leadership, check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Growth, best version of yourself.
Go.
So this is a real estate podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode, an impactful episode of the Impact Agent Podcast. We've got a very special guest in studio today, Miss Sharreda Anderson.
Hey guys.
How are you?
I'm good. Good to be here.
So this is your first podcast.
Yes, it is.
Tell the audience, are you a little nervous?
I'm very nervous, actually, to be totally honest with you. Yes.
Well, they don't know what I know, which is you're about to share something that's very personal to you. You've been in recovery now for about 7.5 years. So some of this is going to be difficult to talk about, but you talk about it all the time, but just not publicly, really. You've done a little bit, right? Yeah. So, this is just very natural. And I think the audience is going to give you a lot of grace because it does take a lot of courage to share your story. Heck, you and I were talking about how we're pretty much same age. You're a year younger than I am. But the way we were raised, it was like you don't share personal business outside the family, right? Yeah. That brings shame on the family, right? Yeah. And you've had some direct experience with that, and we're going to touch on that. We're also going to touch on the fact that you may not do a lot of video or audio content, but you share a lot of posts about sobriety, recovery, and just sharing your journey of what's happening. So let's back up real quick. I want to talk just before we get started, just a brief intro on you, just in case somebody just doesn't make it past the first few minutes, of this episode. I want them to know how they can contact you if they're looking for a property in Walker County or wherever else you serve. So let's give them your service areas, your contact information to include a website if you got one. And I'm sure, do you sell homes on Smith Lake? That's going to be a big buzzword for people listening, right? So tell us everything, everywhere you sell, and how we can get in touch with you if you want to buy or sell in those areas.
Certainly. I cover mostly Walker County, City of Jasper, and the Smith Lake area, but I also do Greater Birmingham. I started in Greater Birmingham and then moved back home to Jasper. So that's where I'm mainly located now. But you can reach me through email is Sharreda, and I will spell that because nobody can spell it. It's SHARREDA.A@gmail.com. And I'm with White Pepper Real Estate out of Jasper, and my phone number is 205-388-8442.
And do you have a personal website?
I do not.
Okay. I don't know if the listeners can hear, but we've got my dog in studio, and she's asleep and snoring. So we don't. That's not me or Sharreda. That's the dog. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about your story, and let's start from the beginning because, you were would it be safe to describe you in your early years as pretty straight-laced?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you were a good kid.
Yeah, I was a good kid. I didn't get in trouble, made really good grades. I guess the worst thing I did was talk too much and may have had a little bit of a smart mouth on me. I've never been real good at having a filter, but I was always a really good kid. Never caused any problems. Definitely had no problems legal-wise or never got in trouble at school. Everything was, pretty smooth for me. I was raised in a conservative Southern Baptist home. We were in church on Sundays, So I never had really any moral issues or moral problems growing up as a child.
And young adult. The wheels didn't come off till much, much later. Is there a reason why you weren't a big partier or you were such a good kid?
My parents were super strict.
They were?
Very, very strict. I remember, like I have older brother and sister, which my brother's like 10 years older, sister's 5. So it's almost like being an only child. We're so separated. But the rules that they had for them, like in the early 80s and stuff, for my brother was exactly what they did for me, So they were very conservative, very strict. We got to go out one night a weekend. That was it. You had to be home by 10:30 on that one night, and they had to know exactly where you were. You never got to be on the phone past 8 o'clock. That was your phone curfew. Our grades were to be all A's and B's. If I got more than 2 B's on a report card, I was grounded until the next report card. And then I had to have all A's to make up for that. And when my father grounded me, that wasn't like what people do nowadays. When he grounded me for 6 weeks until that next report card, I did not go anywhere. I had no company. I had no phone in my room. And depending on the TV situation, sometimes we didn't get to watch TV in our rooms. We could do our extracurricular activities and go to church, and that was it until we brought those grades up.
Do you think that were there any contributing factors from such a sheltered upbringing that you think contributed to what happened later in life? Or did it just seem like normal? It was the only thing you knew?
Yeah, it was normal. I will say, though, I did have, an episode when I first went off to college where I got a little wild, and I drank more then and partied a little bit more then. I actually wound up being pregnant with my first child during that time. And I do think that part of my life probably happened because it was like I had freedom for the first time.
Yeah.
Because we had been under such lock and key for so long. And there were things that I did when I was younger. I had snuck out of the house and did some stuff, but it was just normal, like teenage things. And a lot of that came because of the strictness. Like my friends were getting to do stuff that I wouldn't. But I wouldn't necessarily blame anything now on that. I appreciate it. I appreciate the fact that I don't have things to regret from those days because my parents didn't allow me to be in a situation where I could regret a whole lot of stuff. So I wouldn't necessarily contribute any of that to what has happened to me later on in life. Maybe that little bit of wildness in college for those first few months, but that's about it.
What was the first contributing factor that you feel like started to have maybe a negative impact on your mindset or your psyche or whatever?
Well, I know one time I had a class in college. I have a degree in human development and family studies. And so one of the courses was about substance abuse. And the whole class was just about adolescence and alcoholism and drug addiction. And one of the things they pointed out in that class was it was very common for people with alcoholism to black out when they drank. Mm-hmm. Well, I knew just the few times that I had drank in my life that was common for me. And it scared me to death. And so I remember thinking that day, sitting in that class, oh, that could be me. And so I'm not going to do this anymore. And so it just was never an issue after that. Well, then when I got to be 20, I guess I was 24 when I had gastric bypass. And alcoholism and addiction is very common after that. And
really? I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. And I think it has it's multifaceted in that area. One thing is our body, after gastric bypass, you break down sugars and things differently. You absorb them differently. But also, I ate when I didn't feel good. Like if I was nervous, I ate. If I was sad, I ate. If I was angry, I ate. And so I fed my emotions. So there was always something when I didn't like how I was feeling. Food was supposed to make it better. Well, that surgery didn't allow food to feel that need for me
because you'll
anymore.
Get sick, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'd get really sick. And so I don't know if it was more of like I was genetically predisposed to already be an alcoholic, but because of my raising and like the moral background that I had, and I was able to feed those emotions with food, that when the food was taken away, alcohol became an option. I'm not really sure. There's a lot of different things that go into that. But when I started drinking post that surgery, I don't know if it was the fact that I went from like going out with the girls and having a margarita once or twice a year to having my first glass of wine, and maybe wine hit me differently. But from that first glass of wine I had at 26 years old, within 6 months, I was drinking alcoholically.
Wow. So the way your body was metabolizing this alcohol, you feel like maybe your body was more susceptible to addiction by the way it was processing the alcohol, the sugar, different things like that. We just don't know.
Absolutely. That's definitely what I feel.
Yeah.
And what I've been taught, even in all the classes that I've been through, is it's one of those things where when I put alcohol in my body, I can't stop. My body keeps saying more, 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 more. And I guess I could relate it to if you're an average drinker and you go out for the night and you like nurse one beer all night long, you're not going to drink a whole lot. But if you go out and you chug that first one, you want more and more and more. And it's the way we break down the alcohol, and it takes me longer to break it down, which makes me want more and want more and want more than it does the average person.
So most people, I feel like, if they're using a substance like drugs or alcohol, it's to escape something. What were the things that were triggering you to eat? Was it depression, insecurities? Did your parents argue? Can you remember, trace anything back to things that were happening out externally?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, from birth, I know that I did not feel comfortable in my skin. Like I never felt like I measured up. I never felt as good as my brother and sister. I always felt like a disappointment. I always felt unattractive. It was more physically than anything, but I just always felt like I didn't fit into my family. You know, my brother and sister are absolutely beautiful and handsome and extremely intelligent and successful and athletic, and I just never felt like I was going to be good enough. And then when I got into school, the same thing just kind of, went with me. I've always been unable to be okay with being me. And that's as young as I can remember.
Well, just a little bunny trail question for you. As a father of a daughter, what should I be doing? Because I would imagine as a parent, and even as maybe your best friend back in those days, it may have been hard to know you were struggling with this on the inside. So the only thing I know how to do is to periodically tell my daughter that I think she's pretty. Now, is there something more I should be doing? Because I always felt like, like when my mom used to tell me like I was handsome or whatever growing up, I'd be like, well, you're my mom. You got to say that. So there may be a little bit of that when I tell my daughter she's pretty, but I know so many girls struggle with insecurities. They're just not comfortable in their skin. And then what they have today that you didn't have is freaking Instagram and TikTok, social media, where even these magazines, I mean, just everything, it's like perfect body image, perfect body image, perfect body image. But do you have any advice for me as a dad?
Absolutely. And we do this across the board with everybody. We'd say, you shouldn't feel that way. You're beautiful. Or I don't know why you think that, or that doesn't make sense. Don't negate the fact that she feels that way. So when you reinforce or you tell her that she's beautiful or you compliment or whatever and she acts like she doesn't receive it, or if she says something negative, it's not about stopping the fact that she feels that way. It's about allowing her to feel comfortable being able to explain why she feels that way and try to reinforce how to perceive it differently. We want so quickly to tell people that they shouldn't feel something or they should feel this or they should think that because we think it, but we don't necessarily take time to talk to them and figure out, why do you feel that way? Like, why do you think that way? Why do you see yourself like that when I don't see you that way? And have like a true conversation about it and validate insecurities. There's nothing wrong with being insecure, and we think that makes us weak or makes us a bad person, but we've all got them in different ways. And the more we hide them, the more they can tend to control our lives, because the more we think we're not supposed to feel a certain way, the more we think about it and the more we feel that way because we're trying to fight it off instead of it just accepting it's okay to not be comfortable in this scenario or in this environment or, in whatever's going on, and discuss why I'm not comfortable and what I could do to change that.
I love that's great advice. I have in my notes here, one of our core beliefs here at my company is, progress, not perfection. And I have in my notes here, perfection over progress, describing a story or stories you were telling me from your childhood. And I'm wondering so you can't control the body you're in. You can't control the way you look, the way you sound, who your parents are, who your siblings are. But there's lots of other things you can try to control. And it seems to me that you tried to be perfect in those areas that you could control. And when you couldn't be perfect or when you fell short of perfection, then that just fed the negative dialogue that was going on inside your brain or the negative feelings. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So things like not feeling like I fit in with the family, I could tell you stories over and over again that validate that. There was a story that I have an aunt who she told this forever and ever, and she loves me, and I know she loves me dearly and didn't realize that this did this to me. I mean, even from birth, it's been that I was the ugly one and the one that didn't fit in. And that's what other people even taught me. But when I was born, she was at the hospital and goes to the nursery, and they show her me in the bed, and she's like, "Oh no, that y'all got the wrong baby. That's not Jack and Rita's child." And they're like, "Yeah, no, that's Sharreda, that's theirs." And she's like, "No, there's no way that's their kid." And they're like, "Yes, it is." And she would always end it by saying, "There's no way that's their child. They make pretty babies, and that baby is ugly." And so that kind of stuff. And then growing up with a weight problem, and I know my parents did it thinking they were doing the right thing, but there was a calendar that hung in our house, and I had to write my weight on that calendar starting at like age 8. And that went on to like about 12. And if I didn't put my weight on it, then I didn't get my allowance. Or if I gained weight, I didn't get my allowance. And I remember being taken to Weight Watchers when I was in between the 5th and 6th grade. And that organization doesn't allow children to join. So my mom joined Weight Watchers, and I went with her. So I could pretend like my way in and stuff, but I was the one that was actually on the diet and was losing the weight. And I remember being in high school, and I had a teacher squat down beside me in the middle of a test in the 9th grade. And she said, "You're just not as smart or as pretty as your brother and sister, are you?" And so all of these insecurities that I had, it was like all these things kept happening that was, for lack of a better word, just co-signing that bullshit of an idea that was in my head. And I'm sure that has happened to other people, but when you already believe it and you let people say it, you hold on to what they say. 2nd grade, I had a little boy ask me to be his girlfriend. First day of school. Boy, I thought I was something. I was walking around 2nd grade because I had me a boyfriend. And he broke up with me the next day and looked me dead in the face and said, "You can't be my girlfriend because you're too fat." I'm a 45-year-old woman that specifically remembers that day, that moment, what I was wearing, because he co-signed what I already thought about myself. And so it was just like, the more all those things happened, I was already born with those insecurities. So every time something happened that validated that insecure feeling, I held on to it. And I was like, see, that's got to be true because they think it too. And it made it grow and grow and grow until it was so overwhelming that was all I felt all day long, was how inferior I was and how I didn't measure up. And it didn't matter what I did. And it didn't matter how many times you told me that I was smart or I was beautiful. I didn't believe you, I couldn't believe you because those were just words that didn't make sense to me.
I love this co-signing of the bullshit.
Yes.
That's going to stick with me forever because, man, is that true? And do we all do it? Mm-hmm. We all are guilty of it. All right. So here's some things I've got on my list that we need to unpack that were pivotal moments in your life. Okay. So I have your parents' divorce.
Yes.
Your pregnancy, your subsequent very young, getting married very young, and then graduating, in spite of graduating college with 2 kids. I mean, this is amazing. College graduate, married with 2 kids on the dean's list. And one on the way.
Yeah, I was 6 months pregnant, yeah.
All right, so you want to talk about all those things? I mean, it was the divorce like a tug of war was it a nasty divorce, or were your parents was it an amicable split, or was that pretty rough?
It was pretty rough.
Yeah.
It was rough, and it happened my senior year of high school. And again, everybody does the best they can, and I know that. I know that in this moment now when I look back, but it was very, very traumatic for me. I missed 50 days of my senior year of high school because I didn't want to leave my mom alone because she wasn't handling it very well. And when I got ready, I guess I was a month out from graduating. Now, mind you, I've missed 50 days. I'm a cheerleader and I play softball, and I still have all A's and was a Birmingham Scholar athlete. But there was a staff member at my high school who, her daughter and I didn't get along, and she knew I'd missed that many days. So she turned me into the Board of Education, and they were failing me due to absences. Even though my teachers didn't turn me in, this one particular person did. So everybody at the school had to rally together and come up with hours for me to make up for those days and try to I had to do a bunch of Saturday schools so that I could make the hours up so that I could graduate, even though I was graduating, with A's and B's and missed those many days. I had some softball scholarships offered to me, and the scouts would be at the game, and my parents never even knew I had one offered to me because they were so worried about what was going on with each other, in the bleachers, that they never recognized any of that. So when it came time when I graduated, my dad had always had a rule that we could not go off to Auburn or, to a major university. We had to go to junior college unless we got a scholarship. Well, I didn't get a scholarship, but because of what I was going on, he went ahead and agreed to let me go to Auburn. But I had to go immediately out of high school, like go that summer, so I didn't hit it one fall and football and everything. And my sister was down there. So I graduated high school, and about a week and a half later, started Auburn as a freshman. Was living down there, with no guidance whatsoever. Like I said, everything had been so strict for so long, and started getting a little wild and partying for the first time, and not knowing about curfews, and just not caring, and a lot of it was spiteful,
right?
Like we were fortunate enough that my dad did very well and took really good care of us, and it was like every dollar I spent, I was like, I was just blowing money like crazy just to piss him off,
Yeah.
And so it was just all kind of chaos at that time. And that is when I met what became my husband. And when I met him, I just kind of like attached in a very unhealthy way. And within, I guess I moved down there in June, and by January I was pregnant.
Wow.
And so my family had never met him.
What was that like, having to go home and tell your parents?
Yeah, that was rough. That was bad. That was really bad. My mom took it but they actually both took it really good. I was so scared to tell my dad. It was, terrified. My sister snuck and called him and told him ahead of time. And so when I went home for my birthday in February, he knows at this point, and I walked through the door, and he just looked at me and he said, "So are we going to talk about this first, or are we going to eat?" And I said, "We're going to eat." And so we sat down. So we sat down and ate, and then we talked about it.
Did you know that he knew?
Yeah, when my sister called to tell him, he told her to go ahead and let me know so that I could kind of calm down. And he said one of the greatest things a parent could ever say to someone in that position, he said, "I'm disappointed and I'm upset, but this does not affect my life near as much as it does yours. So fussing at you is not going to do any good. What you've got to face from this point out is hard enough." And I really appreciated that, because why scream and yell at me, or why make me feel worse? I knew it was going to change my entire life plan at that point. So when him and my mom finally met what would become my husband, Jamie, and so I guess I was 6 months pregnant, we ran off to Gatlinburg and got married and came back. And when we came back home, I went to junior college for a little bit, and then I tried to get a job, and things just wasn't working out. And so, there again, Dad come to the rescue, and he was like, "Okay, here's the deal. You can go back to Auburn. You've got a 4-year window to finish in, because that's what I was going to pay for to begin with, and I will only pay for what I was going to pay for were you not to have gotten married or gotten pregnant." And I was like, heck yeah. So we go back down there. Well, I'm already about a semester. It was quarters back in the day.
Right.
I was about a semester behind, so I started taking extra classes. And when my first child turned 1 in September, and I am working at a daycare 18 hours a week to pay for his tuition and going to college full time, and I find out that I'm pregnant again. So I think the family was more upset with the second baby than the first one.
Yeah, they're like, "What do you..."
Yeah. So
didn't you figure out how this works after the first time?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So wind up getting sick at the end of that pregnancy and had to go to bed early. Had to quit school or pull out early. So I took off 2 quarters with him. So at this point now I am a full year behind in school, and get right back into it. The dean is helping me. All my advisors are helping me. I am taking like 23 hours a quarter. They're implementing some graduate courses for my undergrad classes, because they know I've got to get out in a certain amount of time, and they're doing all that for me. And come January, and I don't share this very often, and I prayed a whole lot before I got here, so there's a reason that I'm about to share this. But come January, I found out I'm pregnant again. And I know that with this pregnancy, I won't graduate on time. So freak out a little bit, and my husband and I sit down, and we decided at that point to terminate that pregnancy. So January the 27th of 1999, that's what we did. And devastated. Probably of all the things that I could tell you in my story, that's probably one of the worst things that I've ever experienced. And my husband's way of dealing with it was not talking about it, so I really wasn't allowed to ever talk about it. But I spent probably the next 3 weeks sleeping in the bedroom floor between my other 2 children because I was terrified that because I chose to take one of God's children, that he would choose to take one of mine.
Oh, my gosh.
Carry on to April, and guess what? I'm pregnant again.
Wow.
And so that is my 3rd son. I knew I would never make that choice that I did before. And one of the things that I just held on to, he is now 22 years old, but one of the things I've always held on to was that it was so important for, his name is Parker, for Parker to be here, that God sent him to me twice. And so that's kind of helped soothe that choice that I made and allowed me to kind of keep going, because that was pretty detrimental. You know, there were a lot of things in my life that were choices of my own and things that happened to me that just beat me down so much that I didn't have the strength to stand up a whole lot anymore. You know, I have sat down and rewrote the entire New Testament in my own words, just trying to find God, you know, and figure out why my life was like it was, and I could never find any peace. Never. And I just felt like I kept failing, and I kept failing, and I kept failing. And I remember the very first night that like I said, I'd had alcohol before, but the first night I had that glass of wine, holy cow, it was like at that moment, everything I'd always wanted to feel, I felt.
Yeah, there's something about red wine or wine in general, but like if I have a glass of wine, I mean, even after a few sips, I'm immediately starting to relax. That's not the same with beer or anything else. You got to get a couple in you before you feel that way. So there's something to wine, but you started, I just think it's interesting to mention that you got into watching cooking shows.
Yes.
And you were saying how this particular cooking show you're watching, they would always tell you like which wine to pair with what meal. And that's what kind of started this. Yeah. Right?
Yes. So after I'd had the gastric bypass, I started trying to eat healthier. And, you know, I was like over a year into it. I may have been more like 2 years into it. I'd lost all the weight, and so I was cooking.
How much weight? I like the considerable amount.
Oh yeah, I've lost all total 130.
Yeah,
and I was 24, so that was 21 years ago. So I've been one of the few, you know, success stories. I've never had any health issues or anything, you know, that I would relate to that, other than if you want to relate the alcoholism, you know, rearing its head. But I believe it was always in there. It just came out, you know, afterwards. But yeah, I remember I watched Rachel Ray. I was obsessed with 30-minute meals, 30-minute meals. So I would sit and watch that show and write it down and run to the grocery store. And I remember telling my husband, I was like, pick this up, specific wine that night, and we were going to try it. And he thought it was the grossest thing he'd ever tasted. And I didn't think it was that great. But as I got those next few sips in, I liked it more and more. And then that just warm feeling came over me. And honey, that night I was beautiful. I was smart. You know, I was calm. I slept all night long for the first time. You know, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was younger and was never medicated for it. But my brain was just zinging off the walls, and, you know, sleeping 3 hours a night was normal for me. And I slept all night long, and I was like, oh my gosh, this shit's amazing.
Right.
You know, and if one glass was good, then tomorrow night we're going to have 2. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. But, you know, you've got a lot of baggage. I mean, I've got the stuff I mentioned, and then I've got here in my notes, relationship issues, financial issues, and then your house burned down?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, you think about all this stuff, ADHD, your parents getting divorced, you having severe insecurities growing up, the pregnancies. I mean, it's a lot. Where does the house burning happen in relation to the bypass surgery and all that stuff? What's kind of the timeline for some of this stuff?
Some of it gets kind of foggy, just to be honest with you. But I had the gastric bypass probably about 2002. And somewhere in there, if I took time, I could figure it out. But somewhere between 2002 and 2009, we lost the house, and I was drinking alcoholically. And I think we lost the house in like 2008. If I'm not badly mistaken. I know it was September, and we rebuilt, and I was already drinking alcoholically before that time, but I was hiding it pretty well. I'm pretty sure my husband was aware of it, but I remember, and this is so silly, but I was watching Dr. Phil one day, and these girls were accusing their mother of being an alcoholic, and she was like, I'm not an alcoholic, and they're like, there are bottles hid all over your house.
Yeah.
And Dr. Phil looks at her and he's like, so if you're hiding bottles, do you think that you have a problem? And when he said that, I was sitting on my bed. I got up out of my bed and dug out from under it. There were 23 wine bottles hidden under my bed. And I was like, okay, so
Some
maybe
empty,
I
some
have
not?
Oh, they were all empty.
Wow.
They didn't survive, with something in them. And so I started kind of knowing before everyone else did that I had a problem. But when the house burnt, we were lucky enough that the company my husband worked for, they had a lake house, the owners did, and they let us live there. They were so good to us. But there was an amazing assortment of liquor in that lake house, and I depleted the entire source of liquor and replaced it with water and sweet tea and all kinds of stuff so that I wouldn't get caught.
Wow.
But yeah, the drinking at that point went off the chains. I was drinking every single day, forgetting to pick kids up from school, and then everybody started recognizing it. And then we moved into the house that we built after the fire. We moved in February, and by December, it was the day after Christmas that my husband came to me and he's like, "You've got to get help or you've got to get out. We've had enough."
Yeah. So there was the ultimatum, which led to the first of really a handful of stints at a rehab. The last one finally worked.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Let's walk through that, because this is a time where you started to get into prescription medication, right?
Well, I was just prescribed it one time by a physician. I never really abused the prescription medication, but what happened is the first time I went to treatment, I got out and I was there 14 to 17 days. I can't remember, somewhere in that ballpark. And all that really did was just make me angry, because I knew then they were trying to give me the solution, and I knew where the solution was, but I didn't want to do the work. So I was just angry about it. And so, my family thought I was going to be healed miraculously, because they had no concept of, which I didn't either, really, the disease of alcoholism and what it takes to stay sober. And so I came home and I did okay for a little while. And about 60 days in, I started drinking again and went on like a 14-day binge. And when I tried to stop drinking, I had a seizure. And I told my sister about it. She took me to the emergency room, and the emergency room doctor prescribed me a benzo, which benzos and alcohol do the exact same thing to your brain. Mm-hmm. And so I guess he just wanted to knock me out for a few days so I'd go through with the withdrawals and wake up and be healed. I don't really know what his thinking was, but my sister had the meds and she was giving them to me, but I was sneaking and drinking at the same time. So I was still drinking while I was taking this benzo, 2 of them every 4 hours. And I went to take a shower and went in the shower with, I remember, a full glass of just straight vodka.
Wow.
Yes. And when I came out, all I remember is getting out of the shower, and then I woke up hours later and I had flipped over into the bathtub and hit my head. And my 12-year-old, he was 12 years old at the time. It was my oldest son. He was screaming, "She's dead, she's dead." I was knocked out in the bathtub and terrified him. And my sister came running in there and got me. And she called the treatment center I had been to prior at that point, and they were like, go get an x-ray to make sure, or, an MRI, because she probably has a concussion, and then bring her straight to me. So then I had to go through withdrawals from the medication and the alcohol. It was just a big mess that second time. And I was only there like 6 days for a medical detox. And I was angry and didn't want to be there and had no desire to stop drinking. I really just wanted everybody to leave me alone. I had that whole concept of, I'm a grown-ass woman kind of thing,
right.
And that trip is when I got some diagnosis saying that I had mental health issues. And boy, I was fired up about that because, if I can leave here and they just say that I'm crazy.
You keep drinking.
Exactly. I can keep drinking. I can go to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist can write me a prescription. I can take a pill and I'll be okay. And that means I don't have to do any work on myself. I don't have to figure out any of my problems. I don't have to work those steps. I don't have to get one of them stupid sponsors. I don't have to do none of that stuff. I can still lie and pretend like I got my shit together.
This is what they call denial, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So when I left there, I started with a psychiatrist, and over the next 2 years, and I guess this is what you were talking about with the
psychotropics, or
yes, yeah. Over the next 2 years, I ended up, I guess the last time that I was taking meds, I was on like 19 pills a day, and it was $3,700 worth of medication that I was taking each day, all of them a psychotropic, and still drinking 2 or 3 bottles of wine a day on top of that.
I mean, it sounds like the side effects of that would be like you would be a zombie. I mean, how are you even functioning?
Yeah, I never really was a zombie, unfortunately. I think my family would have appreciated it more if I would have been that. I was more of super emotional. Like I was extremely depressed to the point of, like isolating in a dangerous way and crying all the time and blaming everyone for everything. And then I would go into mania and just be bouncing off the walls and like scrubbing the ceiling with a toothbrush and up for hours and hours and hours. And then I would get angry and like rage on people and be violent and mean and just say stuff that I would have never said before. I would have fits and rip hair out of my head and just, wow. It was like I was not a human anymore, but I couldn't see it because it was my normal. I remember one night I got super drunk and got into it with my husband, and I decided I was just going to walk. And I, in my pajamas, grabbed my purse and put my shoes on, and I'm walking down the street in the middle of downtown Jasper. And I don't know where I thought I was going, but I heard them coming looking for me, and I jumped into the bushes, and they stopped right where I'm at. And my oldest son is in the car with him. And so my oldest son and my husband are like, get in the car. And I'm hiding thinking if I don't move, they can't see me. And they're looking straight at me and saying my name. And that made perfect sense to me. I didn't get how irrational everything was. And even when I came off that medication, and I will say this in the psychiatrist's defense, I never told him I was drinking. And I was diagnosed bipolar, and bipolar is textbook identical to alcoholism. So you can be both, but in reality, an alcoholic or someone going through withdrawals of alcoholism, until they level off, they act identical to someone with bipolar. I know that I have both, but what I would do is I would go in there and I would still have all the symptoms, but the symptoms I was having was because I was continuing to drink. It was not that the medicine wasn't working. So he just kept upping the doses and upping the doses and upping the doses. And that wasn't his fault. That was because I wasn't giving him the full story of what was going on.
So is this a true statement? I mean, your first 2 to 3 stints at rehab, you did not enter the treatment program with the mindset of I'm going to stop drinking.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was just like I got to do this because they're making me do it, and they'll figure out something else is wrong with me besides the alcohol that'll let me keep drinking. But it just never occurred to you, I think, until this last trip or this last treatment that you're like, I'm here to stop drinking.
Yes.
Not to manage it better or drink in moderation. It's like I got to stop this like completely.
Right.
In order to make some progress in my life. All right. So you go in for this third treatment. It's now 2012. Is that correct? And we're going to start to get into some really, as if, all right. So we're about halfway done with this interview. And as if we have not talked about enough, just like really serious incidents that happen, I really think the second half of your story is even worse. Like there's some way more serious stuff like a suicide attempt.
Absolutely.
So walk us through all this.
Yes. I had gotten drunk at work, and my boss at that time was a really good friend of me and a friend of mine. And this was September of 2012. And she took me back to treatment. I was in a blackout, so I didn't even know I was there. So like you said, none of these, they were either trying to get out of trouble or to save my family or whatever. So I wake up that third time there, and I'm just going through the motions. I follow the rules and do what I'm supposed to because I'm a people pleaser, but I have no desire to stop drinking. So I get out, and I guess it was exactly a month from entry to the treatment the last time to this incident. And it was October the 22nd of 2012. I was living with my mom because my husband had decided that last treatment stint I couldn't come back home. And he came over to her house on his lunch break to bring me some money. And we were sitting out on the front porch, and he proceeds to just lay into me. I mean, you are a horrible human. Nobody loves you. You're an embarrassment. The children don't want to be around you. Everywhere you go, you cause problems. Everybody is done with you. This is ridiculous. We're all sick of you, and just going on and on and on. So I go inside, and I'm sitting in the house, and my mom comes home from lunch, and no fault of hers, but she walked right past me, and I'm just sitting there crying, and she's like, "What have you done now?" And she walks out the door and goes out and sits on the porch with my husband. And everything he said on that front porch became true in that moment, because
when she said that,
yeah.
What have you done now?
Yeah, because she walked past me to go out there and be with him, someone who had never always been her favorite. And she, you know what I mean? She knew we had had problems in our marriage, and she loved him. But in that moment, she chose him over me. So everything he had said was correct. So I got up and went into the room I was staying in at her house and got all of my medication, put it in my pockets, and I walked outside. And our marital home at that time was just a couple blocks from my mom. And so I said, I don't want to fight anymore. You know, I'm over it. He hadn't given me the money yet or whatever. And I was like, you don't even have to give it to me. I don't care. So I got in my car and I drove down to the house that we had. I walked in the front door and I walked straight into the kitchen, to the kitchen sink, and I swallowed everything I had. And when we went back and looked, I think it totaled like 187 pills that I swallowed at that one time. And I remember I had not shut the front door. So I went back and shut the door. And then I went into the living room and sat down in the recliner and leaned back in the recliner. And I sent him a text message and said, you'll need to pick up the kids today. That's all I said. And in that moment, I was 38 years old. No, I was 36. I was 36 years old. And in that moment, for the first time in 36 years, I felt absolute and total peace, because I knew I was not going to have to fight anymore. I was not going to have to drink anymore. I was not going to have to try not to drink anymore. I was not going to disappoint anybody anymore. I was not going to be miserable. I was not going to be making others miserable. It was all going to be over, you know. And I know people say that that's the most selfish thing in the world that you could do, but there was a part of me that also felt like I was relieving everybody else of having to deal with me, you know, because nobody wanted to deal with me anymore. I didn't want to deal with me anymore. And I don't know what he got out of that text message, but within a few minutes, Jamie came into the house and he was like, what have you done? And I told him I'd done nothing, and just to leave me alone. And when he went in the kitchen, I guess he saw the bottles or whatever, but he calls 911, and officer gets there first, and I'm trying to convince him I hadn't done anything, and they try to make me walk, and I fell flat on my face. And so immediately I started having symptoms from, you know, I mean, within 20 or 30 minutes, I am having a hard time breathing. I can feel the fluid in my lungs, and there's paramedics trying to work with me. And I was so determined to die that all I could do was roll, because I couldn't use my arms or legs, but I could roll. And so while I was laying in the floor, they would try to help me or try to stop me, and I would just roll away from them. And I'd wait till they got close enough that I'd roll away. And I just remember screaming, nobody loves me, let me die. Nobody loves me, let me die. And a good friend of mine, he retired as the fire chief. He had heard our address, and so he come into the house, and last thing I remember from everything was he flipped me on my back, and he was sitting on my chest holding me down, and he said, your boys deserve better than this. And I remember I stopped fighting in that moment in my mind, but supposedly I didn't. I think I continued fighting until they got me to the hospital, and they intubated me. I was in a coma for 5 days, and when I woke up, I just woke up. I mean, it was the strangest thing. I just, like nothing had happened. I just woke up, and I knew I was in intensive care because of some of the things that they had said. And I had a nurse and my mom in the room with me. And when they walked out of the room, I just was so full of rage. You know, I was so mad that I was still alive. I thought it was all going to be over.
Wow.
Yeah, that's probably the angriest I've ever been in my life. And all I could say to myself was, you can't even do that right. I mean, you screwed that up. You know, you're such a screw up that you can't even kill yourself correctly. And some things happened while I was there that changed that a little bit, changed my opinion on that. My brother came in, and there were some family issues that happened. My ex-husband kind of turned me over, or he was still my husband at the time. He turned me over to my family, and he's like, you're totally responsible for her. We don't want to have nothing to do with her. And then I had to, obviously bring my children in and explain to them what had happened. And they were so angry at me, and I get it. I get it now. But then I didn't understand why everybody was mad at me. You know, I was like, why don't y'all understand how this is painful? You know, I am miserable. You know, y'all are walking out of here thinking about what my actions did to you. Do you understand how I feel when I felt so bad? All I wanted to do was die, and I'm mad that I'm not dead. You know, and I couldn't get that. But I remember a couple of times while I was out of it, I would try to wake up. And, you know, I don't know if y'all have ever had sleep paralysis or, you know, been between sleep and awake, but your body don't move, but you're trying to come to, but your eyes won't open. That happened to me twice. And I knew there was a man in my room. And and the 2 times it happened, he was standing on the right side of me, and he leaned over and kissed me on the forehead. And I just kind of relaxed and went back to sleep. Well, when I was telling my brother about that, and the nurse came in and he was asking her about it, and tears just started rolling down her face. And she was like, baby, there wasn't a man in here that entire time. She said, there was nobody. There was a male that came in here to see you. And she did go on to tell me that I coded twice. And so they had come in, and what would happen is I would start having a seizure from the withdrawals. And both of those times, something was in that room that calmed me down. And I know today that had to be something that came straight from God, and I know that. But in that moment, I didn't want to accept it. But it did calm me down a little bit with my anger, So I wasn't happy to be alive, but I wasn't quite so miserable anymore. It was just like I was numb at that point.
Gracious. Well, we ain't done because, next in my notes here, I have written down homeless.
Yes.
So it wasn't a bed of roses when you got released from the hospital.
Oh, no. I managed to not drink for 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And I did really good, actually. I started going to a few fellowship meetings, going into some 12-step meetings, and I enjoyed that. And I got involved in my church, and I got a job, and I kept thinking, I don't have to do this recovery mess because, recovery is pushing God. Well, if God's in church, then I'll just go to church and that'll be the same thing. And so I didn't do the actual recovery like I should have. Mm-hmm. I'd just go to some meetings to say that I did. And things were going really good. 6 months, and kids are happy, and we're all doing well. I'm living with my mom, and my husband calls me and wants to sit down and talk. And so we did. And he's like, look, let's just do this. You're doing good. The boys are doing good. Let's just call it, let's end it. And we agreed on everything that I had asked for. And we came to a great, agreement that night. And I was fired up. I walked out of that house so excited. And I was going to dinner with a friend who lives out of town. And when I got to the restaurant, she got up and went to the restroom, and she had a drink sitting in front of her. And while she was gone, I drank it. Now, just got everything I wanted, supposedly coming in the divorce. Everybody's happy. 6 months, no drinking, real involved in church, everything going good. And I took a drink.
Well, I don't expect you to recall this, but is it possible that you recall what your inner dialogue was at that moment, or what your thought process was? You saw that drink sitting in front of you, and you just thought it was irresistible?
I don't remember thinking. To be honest, I just remember getting it and drinking it. It wasn't like there was no conflict within me of like, should I or shouldn't I, or no, you shouldn't do that. It was just like
an impulse.
Yeah, it was just like, yeah, life is good. Give me that,
Wow.
And so that night, she and I had said, even when I was drinking during the marriage and stuff and everything, I never really partied a whole lot. I didn't go out to bars. I drank more at home. I wasn't one of those kind of drinkers, not to say that I never did, but that just wasn't my thing. Because when I was in public anywhere, people knew how much I was drinking, and I didn't want nobody to know. So I drank mostly at home. But that night, she and I just went all night long. It was wild. And there were some people who saw me there and thought it would be a good idea to take pictures and send text messages and things like that to the husband that I was separated from. And so I got a text message the next morning and said, I know you've been drinking, the deal's off. And at that moment, this I do consciously remember, I had my phone in my hand and I thought, you're never going to be anything else but this. So just do it the best you can. You're nothing but a drunk. So just be the best drunk you know how to be, and just quit trying to be anything else, because you're going to continue to fail. And from that day, it was somewhere between 18 months to 2 years, I did nothing but drink as much as I could, as often as I could, every day.
Yeah, I have written here that you would sleep with a bottle of wine.
Yes, it got to the point where getting out of the bed, I would be sick. And so I slept with a bottle like a baby curled up in my arm. And that way I didn't even have to roll over to the nightstand or anything. I would just wake up and be able to drink straight out of the bottle. And it would make me so sick. There at the end, just the smell of alcohol would make me sick, but I had to have it. And so I would be nauseated smelling it and gagging and have to take a drink. And sometimes that first 3 or 4 drinks, I would even throw them up. But I would have to keep doing it until I could keep enough down so that I would stop shaking and be able to stand up and function. And during that time also, if I would go without it, because I had no income.
Yeah.
I had no, I lived in my car and I was couch surfing, and people got tired of me doing that. And the house that we had when we divorced hadn't sold yet. And so I remember that winter was the coldest winter we'd had. It was snowing, and I would sleep in that house with no power or water or anything, and just curl up under a bunch of blankets. I'd break into the house and sleep. And then when my mom would go to work, I could get in the back door of her house and I would be able to go to the bathroom and take a shower or whatever. And she acted like she didn't know I was doing it, but I know she did because she would buy food and leave it there, and she knew that food was going missing. But she refused to allow me to be there if I was drinking. That was her boundary. But I guess since she wasn't there and she was at work, then it was okay as long as, because she knew that I was warm and I was getting food, and then I would be out of there before she would come back. And it was insane. And when I couldn't buy alcohol or steal it, I wound up having to steal a lot of it because I didn't have money. If I would go like 8 to 10 hours without it, I would have a seizure. And I would know when I would have them. I got to where I could feel them coming. I think all total through all of my withdrawals over the years, I've had somewhere around 16, 17 seizures with trying to come off of alcohol.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And then which son was it that told you he was embarrassed by it?
My youngest. And they may have all said it at one time, but
this one hit.
We had been to a rodeo, and this story is kind of, it'll embarrass everybody that I tell it, but it's kind of funny. My ex-husband worked for a company that put the rodeo on, like sponsored it. He worked for a tractor company. And so he had just started dating, and he had a girlfriend there. And when they showed up, I just showed my tail. I mean, I acted out and embarrassed everybody, and it was ridiculous. But I did have the rodeo clown's phone number and a lot of free T-shirts and stuff by the time I left there. So I thought it was successful. You know?
Yeah.
I thought I'd done good. But I had just showed out so bad, I humiliated my children. And when we got home that night, my youngest, Parker, I think he was 14 at the time, he was laying in the bed with me, and he just told me off up one side and down the other, and how I was embarrassing and humiliating, and he'd rather be with his dad and the girlfriend than he would with me because of my behavior. And I just let him say it because there was nothing he said that wasn't true. He went to sleep, and I was just laying there, and I thought, I can't do this anymore. And it was the first time in everything that I had done, all the time, going to jail the times that I did, and the money my family had spent on me, and, the suicide attempts and the hospitals and the rehabs and all that stuff. It was the first time I recognized that my behavior affected other people. And so I messaged a girl that I knew had a year clean, and I'd known her my whole life. I messaged her and told her I needed help. And she said, meet me at the church at 2:00. And I knew what she meant because there was a meeting at that church at 3. She didn't even have to go into details. And so I got there. And when I got there, I was like, how in the world did you know what I was asking? And she started laughing. I don't know if y'all remember like the Just Busted publications and in different places across the country do those things where they put all the arrests for that week, and you could pay $1 and get them. Well, she had seen me in one of those where I had been arrested.
For stealing alcohol.
For stealing alcohol at the Walmart, Yeah.
I can imagine trying to steal a bottle of wine is not easy. I mean, where are you stashing this thing? In your purse?
Yes, I carried huge purses, and I would get the small bottles.
Oh.
You get like the 4-packs or the small bottles. Yeah. Now, sometimes I was brave enough to get the big ones, but usually if I was stealing it, it was the little ones. So yeah, that was what I would do. But she had seen that and had been praying for me.
Is this correct? I have 9th arrest?
Yes. Well, by the time I went to treatment, I had 9 arrests.
And the last arrest was on Mother's Day or right after Mother's Day?
It was Mother's Day. Mother's Day, May the 10th of 2015.
Happy Mother's Day.
Yes. So I had decided that I was going to go to treatment, and I was drinking just enough to not be sick. And we were working on coming up with the money to get me into that treatment facility. And we were going through that process, and Mother's Day comes around, and I woke up that morning and went to a friend's house who was in recovery, and I was about to get really sick. I could feel the seizure coming on, and she even agreed with me. She's like, you're not going to make it. You either need to get to the hospital or do something. So instead of doing going to the hospital, I just went to the Dollar General down the street and stole a bottle of wine, and I got caught. And so they arrested me there. So that was my 9th arrest. And all of those things had happened in less than a year and a half, all 9 arrests. So it just went way downhill really quick. And so they took me to jail, and they did allow me to have my cell phone long enough to try to ensure that I was going to get into treatment. So I got there on that Sunday, and over the next 48 hours, I had 6 seizures in the jail floor on a mat until I went to court Wednesday morning, and they released me to my mother to take me to treatment.
Wow. This is what amazes me, okay, is that you had to become sick and tired of being sick and tired. You had to hit rock bottom. But man, did you hit a lot of branches on the way down.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're tough. I mean, you obviously have a lot of strength because, man, you can't even call it stubbornness. I mean, 9 arrests in 12 months, all this other stuff going on. it took so long for you to hit that point. Suicide attempt. I mean, just all of it all together. I mean, it really is a miracle that you're even here talking to me. All the stuff you got there. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people, and I think that like you're one of like the most severe cases that I've ever talked with somebody. But I interviewed another one of our agents who overcome alcoholism, and man, he didn't go through any of this, but wow, it's amazing. All right, so the fourth treatment center was called New Beginnings Treatment Center. Is that right?
Or it's just a new beginning.
A new beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, so you go into this 4 times the charm. Your mindset's different.
Absolutely.
Because you actually, this is the first time you've gone to a treatment facility with the mindset of, I need to stop drinking. That this is the problem.
Yes.
So was it that new mindset and part of the treatment that was offered there? Was there a different approach to the treatment?
Yes. It was both. I was willing. Anybody can get sober anywhere they want to when they're willing to.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful marriage of my personality and what I needed at the place that I had gotten in my life and my willingness. So, this treatment center was exactly where I needed to be. I know, actually, as a matter of fact, when I went to my second treatment, the counselor I had there kept telling me, you have got to go to this long-term facility in Florence, Alabama. The lady that runs it is wonderful with women. And if you do not go there, you are not going to get sober. And I just kept blowing him off. I was like, I'm not going. My kids need me, and they need this, and they need this. And all I remember him saying over and over and over again was this lady's name, Lucy. And he was like, you are going to go to Lucy's. I'm not going to approve you leaving here without going there. And I've already talked to your family. And I remember just like saying some of the awfulest stuff to him, and telling him where he could go and,
right.
and what to do with it, because I wasn't going nowhere. And my mother gets me up there, and I'm getting admitted into this treatment center, and in walks this woman that's about 4'9" tall and dark complected, wearing heels. And she walks through the door and introduces herself. And she said, welcome to a new beginning. My name is Lucy. So I had an opportunity to get there before, and that was where God wanted me to be. I just was too stubborn or strong-willed or whatever, to make that decision before.
Such an amazing story. And so your sobriety date, you'll correct me and tell me what you guys call this, but May 11th, 2015.
Yep, it is my sobriety date. Yep.
I got that right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, good. I mean, that's just like, I've heard some people that have, successfully come out of treatment. Do they call this like a rebirth, or like you're kind of reborn?
Yeah, exactly. We actually, I have a sobriety date, and then when I refer to, and it's kind of funny, when I refer to my actual birthday to people who are in recovery, I call that my belly button birthday.
Ah.
And so, there's the time that I was born, that, I was sent to the earth as a human, and then there's the time that I made the decision to live my life the way I was supposed to live it, and that was kind of like a rebirth, I guess. But yeah, but commonly we just refer to it as our sobriety date.
I'd love to explore what sober life was like and what your outlook on sober life was like. I mean, you went right out of treatment and started waiting tables. You had a number of jobs, florist, worked at an urgent care. You were also a counselor for a number of years. So it was almost like you're kind of starting over and having to find yourself and find your place in the world. And that's not easy.
No, not at all.
And what age are you at this point?
38.
I mean, so you're 38 and starting fresh almost in life and trying to figure out like, what's my purpose? What's my calling? Why am I here? And I'm sure, maybe you're just, since you have this new mindset, are you just humble and grateful to be alive at this point and to have this opportunity?
It's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
There was a lot of humbleness and gratefulness that came as time went on, but there's also still a lot of fear and a lot of frustration and a lot of embarrassment. When you think that you're 38, 39 years old and you're starting all over and you have nothing, I didn't have a driver's license for 6 years. It took me forever to get that back, and it was just like, I'm a grown person who can't take care of anything because I'm incapable of doing it. And now that I'm trying to, the process is so hard and so long that there were times that it was really frustrating. But because of the peace and the hope and all the things that I felt due to the work that I had done, it made it easier to face those things each time something new came up. My mother would always say, I want the old Sharreda back. I want the old Sharreda back. And I would be like, no, we don't want her. She's the one who drank. She's the one who fell in love with it. She's the one that needed it. I need a new, improved Sharreda.
Why was she saying that? What was she referring to, do you think?
To the woman that I was before I started drinking, the good mother and the good wife and, and all that kind of stuff. Because she didn't know I was falling apart on the inside. She just could see the things that were, that I wasn't going to jail and I wasn't, doing all those kind of crazy things. And, and I can see where that was her frame of mind. And a lot of people still see it that way. But for me, it was not about going backwards. It was about going forward. And who was I going to become so that I didn't need to live that life anymore.
Right. Wow, that's powerful. All right, well, is there anything kind of backstory you want to talk about? Because I'd love to talk about how real estate came into the picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
You think we've covered everything?
Oh, yeah, we're good. Let's talk about the good stuff.
Yeah. Because that's like, super heavy. All right, so you've been licensed for 2 years. And so how did real estate get into your radar?
So I was a full-time assistant counselor at Bradford, and I did that for 4 years and absolutely loved it, and got into a relationship with someone who's in real estate and construction. And through the process of that, we went through a really bad breakup, and I had moved to Birmingham, through the process of that relationship, and wind up having to get an apartment. And the day I move into my apartment an hour away from my family is the day the entire state shuts down for COVID. And so I am heartbroken. I am, sad. I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything, but I'm still working because I'm an essential employee. So not only that, because I'm still working, I can't even go home and visit my family. Because, at this time, we don't really know what we can and can't do. We don't know who we can and can't be around. And I'm still out in the world, so I'm not taking that home to my mama and my daddy and my kids and stuff. So I couldn't go visit anybody. I couldn't do anything. And I'm sitting in this apartment and just crying and feeling sorry for myself and, praying every day. There's probably not a piece of floor in that 1,200 square foot place that I live that I have not just laid on my face, crying and praying, what can I do? So I thought, what can I do to better my life and to have made that relationship have like a good impact? Mm-hmm. And I had loved going with him and like looking at houses and stuff, and he'd talked to me a lot about it. So I thought, well, heck, I got time on my hands. Let's get licensed.
Love it.
Yeah. So that's what I did. And got licensed kind of earlier. I guess I finished my class in September, but it took a long time to get the test because of COVID. And then due to my past, I passed the test in September.
Right.
But
I didn't think about that.
Yeah, they would not license me. So
9 arrests. That's
yes,
Look
absolutely.
too good
Yeah, and one of them being shoplifting. That really didn't look good. Mm-hmm. So the October meeting, they already had it full. So I had to wait till November to go before, the board in Montgomery. And my broker went with me. He was so sweet. And I had to testify. It was like being in real court. It was nerve wracking, but they were just absolutely great and so kind to hear that the story was good now, that there was a good ending to it. And so I did finally get my license the week of Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And it's, this one of the silver linings, of course, there's many silver linings here. Mm-hmm. But one of the silver linings is, you had a lot of bad influences along the way, but you had so many good influences and people that just didn't give up. And I just love the story of your brokerage and how they accepted you, rallied behind you, because, and we're going to talk about this in just a second, about how you own this. You live it out loud and proud. I am a proud recovering alcoholic. I have a lot to give back to the world because there's a lot of people that are currently struggling with the disease, and currently the people that are struggling with it don't even know they have it, and people that are on their way to becoming a full-blown alcoholic that this podcast can reach, that your social media reaches. And they were just like, hey, come on. But you and I, we've mentioned this already. We do come from, a very conservative upbringing where, this was Brene Brown, where she was talking about how vulnerability is the new leadership. So this was, that was, you just don't show weakness, I guess is the point. You don't show weakness, and you certainly are not going to bring shame on the family, right? And so you've got a hashtag that's just, it's out there, it's loud and proud, Realtor in Recovery. So we know, that you've been really accepted by, your brokerage and the other agents there, and it's like a work family. But what about the general public and your consumers, your clients, your customers? Have you had some pushback from them?
Not from any consumers, not at all. And I guess if they don't like it, I just don't hear from them. I mean, there may be people who have that opinion, and that's okay. There's a lot of us out there. And I want to represent myself for who I really am, but then I also want people to know that there is no judgment. And also, I was telling you this yesterday, with having been homeless, one of the things I bring to the table is an understanding of the stress and the reality of what it's like to be buying a home and to be in the transition of it, and not knowing how things are going to work out, and how important it is to have, that roof over your head, and to know that when I get off work, I have somewhere to go, and to know that I can take a shower tomorrow. And those kind of things that if you don't have a home, that you don't even recognize, that you take for granted every day. And so I definitely see home ownership and just the stability of that so differently than I think most people do who've never experienced having been homeless.
Yeah. Well, and I know you experienced some pushback from your family. They wanted you to keep this quiet. Right. Well,
just one member of the family. Everybody else was okay with it. They did an article on me in my local newspaper. And they were, I was on the front page, and it was a story during Recovery Month. I think I was four years sober, and I, out of respect, just asked everybody, because that's their hometown too, Yeah. And I was like, look, this is what we're going to do. And everybody agreed. My dad wasn't real comfortable with it. His exact words were, my name got put in the paper every time I was arrested, and that's how he would know. And so his exact words were, the name Sharreda Jacqueline McCullar Anderson has been in the paper enough. And, but I felt like since the rest of the family was okay with it, and I do feel like the part of the fact that I'm not ashamed of it, it's a gift that I get to give people who are scared. And so I'm not going to be scared, hoping that I can be brave enough for someone else who is.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was more important. And so I did the interview, and it ran in the paper, and he wasn't very happy, but everything's good now. But yeah, I've gotten some pushback from some people.
Here's the way I look at it, is that I feel like most real estate agents are trying to relate to too broad of an audience. Mm-hmm. Okay. In doing so, if you're trying to relate to everybody, to 100% of the people out there, then you're at least not going to be authentic to half of those people, or more. And there's plenty of business. There's an influencer, Andy Frisella. Have you ever listened to him? You wouldn't mind him. He uses a lot of bad language. But most people, most people don't. I hate this about this one factor, but like if you use bad language, it turns a lot of people off. Like mm-hmm. they can't hear the message over the vulgarity. But this guy is like, he can change your life with a podcast. But I remember I was listening to a very specific podcast, and it was really the theme of this podcast was finding your 50. And he was saying, I used to try to appeal to everybody and think everybody had to like me. But he came to this realization that I really only need at most 50%, probably not even that much. But within that 50%, I can make plenty of money. So if you as a real estate agent, you just have to find your 50. And that's exactly what you're doing. By being yourself, being authentic, not hiding who you are. And you are relatable, I would think, to a lot of different people who are struggling with eating disorders, alcoholism, all kinds of addictions, sex addiction, substance addiction, insecurities about your body, about the way you look. I mean, just all that stuff. I mean, you can counsel women of all ages on a wide variety of topics, or they can be influenced by you in a positive manner just by encountering you in their Facebook newsfeed. And so I just want to appeal to any real estate agents that are listening, or any salespeople, really. You're a representation of your brokerage. So there's some things that, and I think people, if we air too much dirty laundry, I think that turns people off. Like, because we all have our own problems. But the other thing I know is that when people scroll through, especially social media, all they see is the highlight reel. And your highlight reel is day to day. It's like, I am isolating my focus on being the best version of myself on this day. I would imagine. You just need to take it, in small doses, right?
Yes.
And that just has, such a powerful influence on the world, and it's very attractive. Like, authenticity, vulnerability is, just like Brene says, it's leadership. So I just commend you, and I hope more real estate agents, because you're just going to get more and more successful. Because you're only 2 years in. You got a long career ahead of you. And I would imagine you probably pick up some clients this way. Going to meetings. It's a very social, very tight-knit community, people that are in recovery. And I'm sure you get some referrals that way.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Two of my favorite, I was telling you this when we talked earlier, but two of my favorite closings that I've had are people that I worked with in recovery, and it was like their first time to buy a home. And it took us a long time. And one of the girls, she had 3 years clean, and she was working 2 jobs and watching that credit and working so hard and doing so good. And I was so proud. I think I cried harder than she did when we showed up to sign those papers. It was like being a mom. I was like, it was just the most beautiful thing. And it's so exciting when I get to work with somebody who I know has struggled and worked so hard to come back, and they get to make that purchase, and I get to be there and be the one to walk them through it. So that has been like unreal.
The name of your company is White Pepper Real Estate. Did you ever figure out where that name came from?
I did not. I texted him, but I never did get an answer on that.
You'll have to let me know when you find out. But I have these 3 things written down here that I think are very important to your spiritual life, your mindset. And I want you to speak on these, and we'll close out. But spiritual, mental, emotional, and then talk to us about motive.
Oh, yes. So as an alcoholic, people think that there's certain things I can't do anymore. Like I can't go into a bar. I can't go to a concert. I can't do those kind of things. And that's really not true, because when I work my program and I am doing recovery like I'm supposed to, and I am spiritually, mentally, and emotionally fit, which is what I'm taught through that process, there's nothing I can't do. I can go and do anything that I need to do or want to do, and it's all about my motive. And so that goes across the board to everything I do in life now. When I wake up each morning, I have the process of praying and meditating, and I'm in a group with about 7 other women in recovery, and we send each other a list of 5 things we're grateful for that day. It's about changing my perspective on my day. I woke up before thinking about how it was going to be a bad day, or I was tired, or, dreading what was coming. And now I wake up and think, I have control over that. What other people think of me doesn't control me. What other people say to me doesn't control me. Nothing that happens in the day controls me unless I allow it to. It was like I took all of my power and freedom back in that. And through that, staying spiritually, mentally, and emotionally healthy is knowing that wherever I am spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, it's okay. Like I can have a bad day. I can be mad. I can do all of those things. God did not give me the gift to feel a single emotion that I'm not supposed to feel. It was teaching myself that thoughts and feelings are not facts. Thoughts and feelings come, and I have to differentiate between the truth and the false, and then I control my behavior.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, and my behavior reinforces thoughts and feelings. And so it's just like that cycle of all of that. And, everybody taught me when I was younger, like, you shouldn't think that, or you shouldn't feel that way, or you shouldn't think that, or you shouldn't feel that way. But nobody stopped and said, it's really okay to have a shitty day. You just can't act like a turd.
Right.
It's okay to have a bad day, but I still have to be kind, and I still have to do the right thing. And, and one bad thing happening, there's bad moments, and a bad moment doesn't make a bad day, and a bad day doesn't make a bad lifetime. Whereas like one little thing could happen and I would just think my whole life sucked. And it's not that way anymore. It's about breaking it down into the small stuff and not giving away my power so easily.
I was just thinking, I put my real estate coach hat on for a second. I was like, this concept of motive, like this is something really valuable that I can teach, because I mean, your motive is to be the best version of yourself every day, to be kind, even though, because life hasn't gotten necessarily easier for you.
Oh, not at all.
You know, your motive is just different. If you go to a party where people are getting hammered, there's no point in going to a party where that's just the motive, getting hammered.
Right.
Like if the party is, if it's a birthday party or a New Year's Eve party, you know, that's the motive, is to celebrate the year or the person or the moment, the accomplishment, whatever it is. But that's like people could have this concept of motive just in their day-to-day life, their day-to-day work life. I can't tell you how many real estate agents that I've encountered over my career that they wake up every day, they know they need to do something to put themselves in a crossroads between some sort of a consumer, buyer, seller, investor. They know they need to be doing something to sell real estate. They're just trying to decide what it is that day. And there's not a lot of preparation, a lot of thought around what's going to happen tomorrow, or what, you know, they're trying to just kind of make it up as they go. When we live life that way, we eat things we shouldn't eat. And this is like meal prepping, you know, setting out your gym clothes and then just getting your mindset right. Like, hey, I ain't going to get hammered. I'm going to celebrate my friend, and I'm taking a separate car, and I'm not going to let myself get in a situation that I can't get out of.
Right.
I look at just this intentional congruence in life. I had one of my coaches plant this seed in my brain, and it's just stuck with me ever since, that just like everything feeds everything. There's so much congruence in life. There's so many similarities and commonalities and things that just flow, and recognizing just these little, like these tiny hinges that are going to swing these big doors. You know, just mental preparation, physical preparation can make your life so much easier and help you get through the hard so you can get to the easy.
Yes. When you were talking about that, I was thinking about that is my approach real estate wise, and even with my social media and stuff. Like when I put something out there, it's the message, or it's to make you laugh, or it's to let you learn a little bit about me. And ultimately it's because I want you to be entertained or inspired or whatever by me, so that you feel comfortable enough that when you think real estate, you think Sharreda.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the ultimate. But my motive each day will be behind whatever I'm feeling. Like my motive could be to get out a certain message about gratitude, or I see something funny and I want to share it because I think I'm the funniest human in the world. I'm always the funniest person in the room, you know, and everybody knows that that's how I am. And it's just about getting that out there in that moment. And even when I have a client, I work more with buyers than I do listings, which makes sense with the way that I present myself.
Yeah.
But, you know, I break it down to when I'm meeting with a buyer to look at a house, I don't show a buyer a house because I'm thinking about that close. I'm showing a buyer a house because I'm thinking about, what do they like? Is this going to make them comfortable? Are they going to be happy? You know, what do they need? And every experience of every home we go into, even if I know it's not something that they want, I learn more about them, you know? And so my motive that day is to go and learn about them and to spend time with them and see what makes them happy. And we're thinking about that. Where can we put their family? So I break it down into each day, each action. What is my intent and motive behind that? And then the big goals just fall into place. I don't have to worry about when is this going to close and am I going to get paid on it and how much am I going to make? If I show up every time in the moment with the appropriate motive for what we're doing at that time.
That was some seriously valuable coaching. Here's two themes or two, you know, lessons from this interview is check the conversation you're having with yourself. Check that conversation and then check your motives.
Absolutely.
Check that motive. If your motive is to go somewhere to get completely blasted, that's probably the wrong motive, right? All right, let's tell everybody again how they can get in touch with you if they want to buy in Walker County, Jefferson County, Shelby County. Heck, you go to St. Clair County?
I'll go anywhere.
You'll go anywhere.
I
And
will go anywhere.
How can they get in touch with you?
Yes, you can. Easiest probably would be through social media. I have my Facebook page, Sharreda McCullar Anderson, and then I have a business one too that is Sharreda Anderson, the Realtor in Recovery, and then Instagram is Sharreda Anderson, the Realtor in Recovery.
Because they could just put hashtag Realtor in Recovery
Absolutely.
in the search bar and social media, and you're going to be all over it.
Yes.
Are you okay with people contacting you if they feel like they're going to have a drink?
Absolutely. Yes. I'm not only a real estate agent, I am also, even with my degree from Auburn, I now am a certified recovery support specialist. So I work part-time as a peer in treatment. And that's on top of just being a woman in recovery who wants other women to be in recovery. So yes, that is just as important to my everyday life as real estate.
Yeah. So if they want to go deeper into your story, just get some advice from you, you're totally open to being contacted.
100%.
In that regard, I love it.
Yes.
All right. I interrupted you. Did you get all your contact information out? Did you get cell phone, everything out?
No,
email?
no.
Get that all out.
Email is Sharreda.a, that's SHARREDA.a @gmail.com. And phone number is 205-388-8442. I feel like I should sing it at a jingle.
Yeah, you probably should, because you could pull it off if anybody could. I have really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you.
This
Thank
has
you
been
for having me.
an amazing interview, so powerful. I cannot wait to share it with the world, and I just appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Impact Agent Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Diana Will Lending Team at Princeton Mortgage. That's NMLS 1740691. You can apply online at dianawillteam.com. We're also proudly sponsored by my team, the Jason Will Real Estate Team, that serves real estate buyers and sellers from Birmingham to the Alabama Gulf Coast, so Birmingham to the beach. And you can find our real estate team online at jasonwillrealestate.com. And last but not least, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, if you or somebody you know has an impactful story to tell and would be a great guest for the Impact Agent Podcast, please connect with me. You can reach me via email at jason@jasonwillrealestate.com or call or text me on my cell 251-583-9728. Thanks so much for listening. And if you've been impacted by this podcast, please give us a 5-star rating and share it with somebody who needs to hear one of our pre-recorded messages. Thank you so much. I'm Jason Will, Jason Will Real Estate Team. Appreciate you very much. Look us up online, jasonwillrealestate.com.